I guess from a product management standpoint, I would, as my story that I told earlier probably told and reinforced over and over again, is API first, right? So when you're a product manager, if you are planning on building in a platform way, you need to think about what you're building so that you can eventually externalize what you choose to. It's not a mandate that you need to externalize your API, but if you don't build it in a services way, you never have the optionality to do it.
So just to give you a little bit of background on Dalen, so Dalen brings together remarkable knowledge of commerce and retail platforms from Shopify and eBay, as well as developer-driven product understanding from her experience at Atlassian, Google Cloud Platform, and Intel, who acquired her SaaS company in 2013. As VP of Developer Platform at Mashery, Dalen created the Mashery API Network, an open data commons of RESTful APIs, and an ecosystem of hundreds of thousands of developers who build web and mobile applications. And now she is the Director of Product Marketing with a focus on platform at Shopify. And the title of your talk is, I forgot. Platform is the new product. So.
All right. Thank you. Can't hum a few bars and fake it from behind while I'm getting this up. How's everyone doing tonight? It's good to see everyone. I wanted to just kind of, by a raise of hands, so I know who's in the audience tonight. I'm really hoping that for the panel, I know we have a lot of expertise probably in the audience, so I'm hoping it's not just a panel discussion, that we're going to actually leverage knowledge in the audience as well. So how many of you guys are product managers? Okay, and how many of you are retail product managers? Okay, and one more question, how many of you guys have ever used Shopify before? All right, awesome. Well, I'm really excited to get going. If you haven't heard of Shopify before, my name is Dalen Simons, and I head up product marketing for the platform team there. They're a growing Canadian company, and if you are looking for any context about Shopify, which will be really interesting as we get into the retail tech trends I'm going to be discussing later, you can Google, not now, while I'm talking, but later tonight, you can Google Jim Cramer, Mad Money, and Shopify. And you will pull up in the magic Google machine some 8.5 minutes of amazing context about Shopify. But tonight, I'm going to kick off with a story. And we're going to set the stage for some of the panel discussion later. We're going to get into 3 retail practices that we practice at Shopify today, and we're going to get some insights not only in the product promise, which we all as product managers and people who work in product know what the product promise looks like, but also product realities. What happens when you actually implement some of these things? And those 3 things that I want to take a deeper dive, if you guys are all up for it, are headless commerce and direct to consumer retail, as well as GraphQL. So those are the 3 that I'd like to talk more with you about today. Your storyteller for this evening, who's going to go for the storyteller, has been around Silicon Valley since 1995. That was the year that eBay, Amazon, and Yahoo were actually born. So I've been around for a while. I've worked at eBay in developer platform, Google Cloud Platform. As Javed mentioned, our SaaS startup got acquired by Intel. And then most recently, I made my way to Atlassian. And I see a couple of coworkers from Atlassian in the audience tonight. They are the makers of Jira and Confluence for those of the more technical members of the audience, in case you hadn't heard of them before. Part of my story arc in my career, and so I can be honest about some of the biases that I'm going to be talking about in my story today, is one, developers have always been my customers. So for a lot of you in the audience, maybe your customers are online retailers or pop-up store owners or online merchants, etc. Mine have always been developers, so that's one bias I bring. Two, I've usually always been on the cloud or software as a service side versus on-prem side. So you'll notice a lot of that bias in my trends too. So we begin our story. Once upon a time, long, long ago, at the beginning of humanity, humans gathered to barter and trade with other humans for useful things. So that is basically the beginning of commerce as we know it. It's like the ancient shores of Mesopotamia. We're going back thousands of years. And all of the while, back in this era, commerce was in the hands of the many, not of the few. And so that's a theme I'm going to pull through some of our trends tonight. So fast forward couple thousand years, retail has evolved a little bit. So in the mid-90s, as I was just getting into Silicon Valley, there was a simple, humble peddler of books that started the disruption of an entire industry. Fast forward another 20 years or so, and this book peddler has now transformed an industry, and it accounts for roughly half of all e-commerce sales in the United States. They are a $1 trillion value company, and 90% of the revenue that goes into that valuation, which, depending on the day, is the most valuable company in the world, comes from retail. And the reason that's important is because of their recent Q4 earnings statement. Rather than putting up a screenshot of an earnings statement, I thought this tweet did it a lot better, actually. So imagine 90% of your valuation coming from retail, but you've only mentioned it 2 times in your earnings statement. That's pretty telling because these are forward-looking statements and you're giving signals to your investors in the markets. We can go up. The one that we're going to be talking about mostly tonight is AWS, mentioned 78 times. At a different comparable for amount of revenue that it generates for Amazon today. This is interesting because the industry juggernaut of public cloud and infrastructure as service has its roots in retail. That's why we're talking about retail tech trends here today. And 40% of the cloud globally comes from this company, as opposed to all of the other ones, with the exception of Alibaba. They also have roots in retail, and they're definitely up and coming. So with a $23 billion valuation annually for Amazon Web Services and 40% of the market, they are now a behemoth. So that's like a 10,000-foot view of commerce starting in the hands of the many, and we're coming into 2011 now. Does anyone know who this is? Does anyone know who Steve Yegi is? Okay, good. This will be a good start. So we 10,000-foot view down to like maybe 100-foot view. Steve Yegi was a Google services architect. He had also spent time at Amazon. He published the rant heard around the world in 2011 when they launched Google+, proclaiming in a post that he thought was internal only. Because Google+ was so awesome, it immediately went out to the World Wide Web for all of us to see. And it was like the shot heard around the world. He was basically saying Google+ was dead on arrival. It had a fatal flaw. It's because they built it like a product instead of a platform, right? So he's basically saying, and here's the mandate from the simple, humble book peddler that says, if you don't follow these things in my company, you will no longer work at my company. And he said this is, Steve Yegi is basically saying that actually has benefits when you're launching product because you're building it like a platform Platform think instead of product think. So something happened 2 weeks ago. It's as if Steve Yagi knew exactly what was going to happen 8.5 years ahead. So literally on March 7th, 2 weeks ago, they announced the shutdown. So it's as if he knew that companies who continue to build as products instead of platforms do so at their peril. Well, what's happening in retail? So we've got the most recent Sears, Orchard Supply Hardware. We've got Payless Shoe Source. I'm really sad about that one because I used to actually do the buy one, get one free. And I'm sad that went away. Turns out that wasn't a sustainable business model. I don't know why. Well, platform is happening in retail. And this is important because it puts commerce back into the hands of the many instead of the few. And this, again, is a central part of direct-to-consumer retail, which Shopify is a big player on. So Shopify has a point of view on this that's important as we get into the biases that I'm introducing to these 3 retail tech trends. And Harvey Finkelstein, so when I kicked us off here on the 8.5-minute video, you guys are going to be really interested in watching. That was our COO talking to Jim Cramer. And he basically is stipulating that for commerce to survive, it's imperative for all of us that commerce go back into the hands of the many. Another way that we at Shopify can ensure that we're going to be doing this is that our founder, who happens to also be a simple, humble peddler of snowboards. This was back in 2006. Toby Luca is German Canadian. He's also a Rails badass, if any of you code in that language. He built it himself, and he basically, from the very beginning, he also had a mandate, that Shopify would be built as a technology and business platform, and we would always be focused on building what the majority of the merchants need the majority of the time. So that's a very simple premise. But what that actually means is we were built with intention not to build everything ourselves. Stated a different way, Shopify is a foundation of APIs and services, and we're inviting in an ecosystem of developers and partners to build apps and services. And they are able to customize it down to the unique needs of every merchant, which is very powerful. So again, if we build an 80% platform, what we're talking about is we're not complete yet. We're only 80% of the solution. It actually takes our app developers to complete the 100% solution. So it's kind of a Hollywood moment. Oh, my Jerry Maguire's a little pixelated. I'm sad about that. But I love this part where he looks at Renee Zellweger with these looks in his eyes and he says, "You complete me." That's how I feel about Shopify's ecosystem. This is the point of view of one of our partners. So it's not just Shopify who says this. Basically, yes, you guys have the 80%. Actually, that's not so hard to replicate. What's really hard to replicate is that 20%. And how do we know this approach to platform is working? How do we know that our approach to putting commerce back in the hands of the many instead of the few and building in a platform way is paying off? One way that we know is the valuation of our own company. So Q4 2018 earnings of our own, hence the Jim Cramer Mad Money episode with our COO who was talking about this. We broke records as the fastest growing SaaS company ever to reach $1 billion in revenue. We were growing at 54% year over year as of the end of last year. As a comparable, like a pioneer, I would say, in the space, Salesforce.com, a lot of people know, and they are very successful. When they reached the threshold of $1 billion in annual revenue, they were growing at 23% year over year. just as a comparison. And then another way, which I arguably is more important, as Toby was saying, I usually don't highlight financial milestones because we see them as a lagging indicator rather than a leading indicator. But this, to me, says a lot, too. And this is something that our COO shares publicly every time we gather for our annual developer and partner conference, Unite, is that that number in the yellow is the value that our ecosystem takes away. We're not here to just extract value from developers and ecosystem partners. It's really important to us as a retail operating system that 20% developers, that 20% is actually creating more value than we are taking for ourselves. And I think that is a way to think about platform that's very powerful. All right, so that was my story. What'd you think? Yeah? Yay, oh, God. All right. I got a couple thumbs up, that's awesome. So here's what I'm hoping when we sit down with our other panelists and we invite them in to talk about some of the concepts. I would love to talk to you all about headless commerce, direct-to-consumer, that I mentioned already in my story a little bit, and GraphQL. Headless commerce, how many people in the audience know what headless commerce is? Oh, great. Okay, I've heard people call it an enterprisey term. I disagree with that. I think there's a lot of value for small to medium-sized merchants who have technical skills and want to customize it for themselves as well. So the basic premise is that you decouple, for folks who don't know what headless commerce is, the basic premise is for marketers like me who don't want to wait in line for their product development organizations to build the front end that they need, they actually decouple it. So there's a back end and there's a front end. And with a couple of front end developers, you can do some amazing personalization. And so it frees up your marketing team, and basically there's less costs on the back end, so you can have all of this amazing personalization without sacrificing site speed and performance. Pretty great, right? So that's a great product promise. Product realities. This is just a list of some of the developer tools that we have to achieve customization of your storefront. But depending on the platform, there could be high sunk costs. That's the enterprisey part of it, right? So if there are sunk costs to being able to use your product development organization in a nimble way before you realize the benefits of the front end payoff, then maybe that's not worth it. And the other thing to keep in mind, and Shopify certainly has a lot of merchants like this, sometimes something simpler is fine. Sometimes just like headless CMS is the right thing for companies that have developer talent, sometimes you just want like a WordPress thing or Drupal, right? Sometimes that's the right answer for your store. On to direct to consumer. I think I talked a little bit about the product promise of digital brands. I know that Allbirds registered. Is Allbirds here tonight? Awesome. I look forward to meeting you afterwards. So Allbirds, Kylie Cosmetics, Bombas, Tommy John, Fashion Nova, who was on my earlier slide. These are all brands that were born in the digital space, and they are taking advantage of a lot of things that are probably in your Instagram feeds right now. But even more than that, there's traditional consumer packaged goods companies that are taking advantage of this too. So it's not just the cool digital brands, it's also Budweiser, Procter & Gamble, Red Bull, and my favorite example right now, because poor Elon is like, do I do online, do I sell my Teslas offline? Do I just do online? What am I going to do? And the good news for him is that Shopify will support him regardless where he ends up in that decision. The product realities, again, for maybe some folks in this audience, is sometimes it's easier to rent, what we would call rent your customers through a marketplace, because that way you only ever have to focus on supply, right? You don't have to worry about the demand. And that there is freedom in that from a product development standpoint. The other thing is maybe your product, it's not so important that you have a brand identity like Kylie Jenner or Serena Williams or Tom Brady or any number of our Shopify customers. Maybe you would be better served by traditional retail channels that have more established supply chains, right? Because brand is not part of your value proposition. And then lastly, I would love to have a discussion about GraphQL. Does anyone use GraphQL at their company in production? All right, awesome. GraphQL, there's definitely a product promise and product reality for this. Shopify realized over 3 years ago, so we were a pretty early adopter of GraphQL, and now we have decided to dog food our own APIs. We make it available as a service, and we actually build our mobile app as well as our admin interface for all of our stores on GraphQL. And that's because it's highly performant. It has really great benefits because it's powerful out of the box. It's type safe, so you make less errors. It's extremely efficient, so no more chaining 5 API calls together to get one single action. You can actually make sure that, by declaring what your app wants, that you get exactly the data back that you need. All right, so product realities as of 2019 is not every developer in our ecosystem or partner in our ecosystem is ready to go to GraphQL with us. And that's okay. So from a Shopify perspective, we've decided it's worth the investment to actually support both. We want developers to have the choice to experiment with some of our APIs and make sure that we have a terrific developer onboarding system for them when they run into scaling issues like Shopify was running into. But we also know that we need Rest to be right there with them. So it's worth it for Shopify to do 2 sets of docs, 2 sets of code samples, 2 sets of support, right? That is a big investment. And so that not every company is going to make that choice, but Shopify, that's when we made our choice. So I look forward to continuing the discussion with my fellow panelists, and I hope that you give me feedback on those headless commerce, direct-to-consumer, and GraphQL experiences that you have. Thank you.
Awesome. Let's switch this. So next up, we have Aditi Sampath. That's how you say it, right? Yeah. Yes, okay. So Aditi is currently a senior product manager at Walmart Labs. She has over 12 years of experience in product management, strategy, marketing, and engineering in growth stage companies and global corporations. Prior to Walmart, she was leading the advertising product team at Machine Zone, and before that, she was the director of product at QuinStreet. She has worked at companies such as Microsoft, IBM early in her career. She has an MBA from the University of Southern California and a computer science engineering degree from India. She's also a product management instructor and featured speaker at Product School in Silicon Valley. And with that, she's going to talk about finding the right problem to solve. And I'll hand it over to Aditi. You want to?
Cool.
Great.
Thanks, Javed. Appreciate it. How's everyone doing today? Thank you so much for coming here on a weekday evening. I'm really excited to spend the rest of the evening with all of you. A little bit more about me. At Walmart right now, I am on the online grocery team. So I manage the app and website customer experience here at Walmart. So I know a lot of you are into product management, but very few of you are in retail. So if you are interested in retail product management, and if you don't have that experience, then feel free to come and talk to me, because I did not have any product management experience in retail prior to coming to Walmart. A little bit at Amazon, where I was working for Kindle, if you consider that e-commerce. So it's possible to make that transition. At the end of the day, we all are very passionate about building products as product managers, so it doesn't matter what product it is. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about how do you find the right problem to solve. I think we Dale in earlier to asked us, like, how many of you here are product managers? I'm going to ask a slightly different question. How many of you were or are engineers? Great. Me too. So all of us love problem solving, right? Especially if you were an engineer like me. You believe you have a distinct advantage if you are good at problem solving. When it comes to product management, the common notion is that product managers are responsible for identifying the problem to solve, coming up with a bunch of ideas to solve it, then working closely with design and engineering to define the look and how the product should work. While all of that is true, while all of that is true, a key focus for a product manager should be around problem definition. So there's a very famous saying, if I were given 1 hour to save the planet, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes resolving it. So this goes to show the importance of problem definition. So as you're thinking about defining the problem, the rigor with which you define it really is the most important factor as you're coming up with a suitable solution. So now that we know why problem definition is so important, how do you actually go about doing that? Really 3 simple steps. One is, in the product management world at least, it's about knowing who your target customer is. Especially in like a B2B world, you need to obviously know what your users want versus what your buyers want. In a B2C world, it's very important to know who your target segment is and who do you want to go after. The second step is really understanding their needs, right? Here is where, as PMs, we have to be very empathetic about the customer, understanding what their motivations and goals are, what their pain points are, and based on that, come up with the list of needs that truly matter. The next step is prioritizing those needs, right? And how do you do that? Obviously, there's a lot of quantitative and qualitative data that is available to us that we could leverage in order to prioritize. Easy peasy, right? Like just 3 steps. Just go and do it. In reality, it's easier said than done. So let's take an example from a real-world case here. So I currently work for the online grocery team here at Walmart. And if you look at online grocery as a market in itself, the US grocery market is expected to be $36 billion in 2019 and expected to grow to $110 billion by 2023. Specifically, when it comes to online food and beverage category, it's expected to grow 18% this year to reach up to $20 billion in overall sales. So it's definitely a very fast-growing market, and Walmart is the #1 grocer in the US. And specifically when it comes to online grocery, Walmart is definitely one of the top contenders there. So this was a survey that was done last year, obviously very small sample set. But if you look at 2017 versus 2018, Walmart was the #1 online grocer of choice in 2018, surpassing Amazon and some of the other local grocers. So very, very interesting space, very fast growing. It's going to get intensely competitive. So obviously, as a PM, I have many, many interesting problems to solve for, right? So how did I go about solving one of these problems that I encountered last year? So one of the areas that's very interesting when it comes to grocery is meat sales. So traditionally in supermarkets, like meat was the biggest sales category. So I think last year it was a $67 billion worth market. So meat obviously is a very important category for Walmart. So as we were, it's also important from a basket building standpoint because it increases the overall basket spend as you add meat to that. So in case of Walmart, the percentage of online sales that we were observing from meat was much lower, online was much lower than that of stores. It was over 18% lower than that of stores. So huge gap to fill, right, from online. What was happening was customers were going and purchasing more meat in stores, but they were not purchasing as much on the app. So why? Why was that happening, right? So there are obviously many different reasons why that could be happening. So our merchandising team came to us and said, one of the big problems, I believe, they believe, why we are not selling more meat online is because we are not showing a realistic price point for meat items online. And this was specifically the prepackaged meat category. At first, I was like, okay, I'm a vegetarian. This is an interesting problem. How do you even buy meat? What types of meat even exist, right? Like, that was my first reaction. But then I held back my emotions, and I was like, okay, let's talk a little bit more. Let's understand a little bit more around what is happening online versus what's happening in the store. So the screenshot you see on the left is one of the POVs that we show on the online grocery app and website. So that's a steak, Angus beef steak item. So typically a prepackaged meat does not have standard sizes when it comes from suppliers. So this particular one had a weight range between 0.4 to 1.44 pounds. So as a customer, you could get anywhere within that range when you walk into the store. Each of that is properly labeled as you see on the right. Online, what we were doing is we were showing the max weight-based price. So the $14 you see here is 9.94 per pound multiplied by the maximum weight, which was 1.44. So $14 is the upper bound of what it can be. So it could be as low as like $4. So we went to a nearby store, the Milpitas store here, and we saw the same item actually had a price range anywhere between $7 to $8. So clearly, it seemed like online the prices were higher, or at least that was the perception. The another interesting part here is even though these are the display prices, ultimately in both cases, we charge the customer based on the actual price. So whatever the meat weighed, that's how much we would charge them. Sorry, I'm looking for water. Thing didn't work. So the merchant team came to us and said, okay, we believe that online we're actually causing a sticker shock by showing a very high display price. So they even went one step ahead and they said, you know what, we actually know the solution, and the solution here is just show average price and we should be good to go. Yeah. So based on what they said, the problem was displaying max weight price is causing sticker shock for meat items. So the solution is mitigate sticker shock for meat items. And how do you do that? A couple of different ways, right? You can brainstorm like 10 more ideas there. One was showing the average price. The other one was actually showing a range, which might end up being too much information. And the third one was actually capture inventory in real time. So with what is in the store. So today, the inventory is actually shared between online versus the store. So if somebody walks into the store and takes 10 packages of meat in the aisle, then automatically the inventory has to be subtracted, right? So if we are able to have smart aisles and capture that information, which is a very costly project, but doable, right? Then that would solve the problem. So what did we do next? Shortlist the solution and build it? Of course not. So we decided to dig further into the problem space. It's really like peeling the layers of the onion, right? At the surface, this is the problem, but is this really the problem? So the first step, right? Now we're truly applying what we talked about earlier, like defining the target customer. Of course, this is more complex than how I've described it here. So there are two sides of the equation here. Just like Uber, where you have a driver and a customer, we have two apps as well. One is what the grocery purchaser uses, which is our target segment. The other one is the personal shopper who actually gets all these orders and does the pickup and dispenses it. So as we were thinking about solving anything for the grocery purchaser, one of the constraints that we were aware of is we cannot introduce any operational overheads to our personal shopper. Operational overheads could be things like increasing the pickup times, which means some additional information now comes to them and they have to do extra work. Because any extra operational overhead means increased cost, right? So the key takeaway here is both of them are equally important as you're thinking about the problem as well as the solution. So the next step was to come up with a bunch of hypotheses. Obviously, the number of hypotheses that I came up with were many, many more, but these were sort of some of the top areas, right? So the price aspect of it, that already came from the merchandising team. They said that, hey, customers perceive price for meat online is higher than that of alternatives. That's the whole sticker shock problem. The second one was around selection. So which is customers not having wide range of choices online. Maybe they don't have as many choices that they find in the store. The third one was around customers not able to specify the desired weight when they purchase online. So today earlier what was happening was you could only say, I want X number of packages. You couldn't say, each package, I want it to be this weight or up till this weight. So there was no input preference on the weight. All you say is like X number of packages. And on the picker side, the picker would pick whatever they feel is the right thing for them, depending on the mood or depending on the day. And it wasn't even done consistently by store. And we have thousands of stores, right? Yes? Yeah, it could, right? I think the question was, does this appear in other categories as well? Yes, on the produce category as well, there are preferences like this that are asked. Preferences around weight, but also produce is the other things, right? I want my bananas ripe. I want my bananas not ripe. So yeah, so those would be the other type of preferences when it came to produce. But at the very minimum, one of the feedback was around having some sort of control in how much I'm actually going to get as a customer. The last one was around quality, right? And here, always the expectation from the customer is they're going to get the highest quality. So one of the hypothesis was customer perceive that what they would get when they buy online is closer to the expiry date, because stores are trying to get rid of it, right? So it's a perception. So obviously, we had a bunch of hypotheses here. The next step was to go ahead and validate that hypothesis. And how do we do that? Obviously, with data. So we get tons and tons of user feedback. And this particular case, this was qualitative feedback that we get from customers. So when we did an analysis of the qualitative data for the previous 6 months, it turned out that as we bucketed the feedback that came for prepackaged meats, it turned out that price was actually the lowest of the concern. The top dissatisfaction reason was not having the control in how much meat a customer wants. To dig that even further, here are a couple of comments, right? So where one comment, the customer said, hey, I'm actually looking for something lower because I'm just a family of 2. And the same user or a different user could ask for more meat, let's say if they're throwing a party, right? They want something on the higher end. So depending on the customer, depending on the use case, what they want could be the highest or could be the lowest, right? And that was a big learning for us. And obviously, there are other problems we could look at, but this was, quality and some of the other pieces are more on the feedback to the merchandising team as to how do we increase selection. But really on the digital side, what we could do is how can we give more control? So pretty clear, right? Yeah. Sorry? So your question is, where is this data coming from? This is our internal user feedback. So we have users who, these are customers giving us feedback. So we collect feedback from users. So it's from our, I think after every order we do like a survey where you can put in information. Yeah. So literally like voice of customer feedback that is coming to us. Thousands of those. This was around 2000. Yeah, pretty big. Yeah, we need more AI sort of techniques to go through that stuff, for sure. So pretty clear, right? So what would you do as a product manager next? I'm like, this is very clear. Let's not worry about this price thing. Let's just go and focus on the control and dig into that further. Well, yes and no, right? As when I was playing devil's advocate, one thing that came to my mind was the counter argument could be that hey, if customers are seeing sticker shock, they probably are not even coming and giving us feedback. They're probably bouncing off the site, right? They just saw the price and they just left the site. So that might not be getting captured in this data, right? So I decided to do more user research studies. So after a bunch of user research studies that we did with prototypes, with different options, these were sort of the top takeaways, right? The first thing was the top 3 pieces of information on the site that customers look at when they make a purchase decision is what amount I would actually receive, what's the total cost, and what's the price per unit. The second takeaway was the biggest pain for them was not knowing what I'm paying for, so they loved the idea of getting control. So this validated what our earlier VOC feedback had said. The third thing, which was interesting, was most customers actually understood the max weight base price, especially if they've shopped before on our site, and a lot of grocery shopping is a repeat purchase, right? They get it. That said, what we were not doing is consistently messaging that the final cost is based on weight throughout the flow. So one of the key feedback that we got was, hey, you do want to like surface that messaging throughout the flow, but not necessarily change the price, just to add more clarity to the pricing. So those were the key takeaways. And based on that, reframe the problem, right? The new problem that we were looking at was, as a customer, I'm unable to get the preferred quantity of meat when I ordered online. And so the solution was some sort of input preference for quantity is what we wanted to build. And how do we do that? There's obviously a bunch of solutions, right? I mean, I just gave a bunch of solutions here, but you could do free-form field. You could even actually introduce weight ranges, right? You could show the customer that, hey, pick something between 5 to 6 pounds, 6 to 7 pounds, 7 to 8 pounds, right? The good part with that kind of a solution is now you can show the price that is corresponding to what they picked. So it solves the other problem around price as well, so the price is more realistic because it's closer to what they want to actually purchase. So the key takeaways were, it's easier said than done, as I said earlier. It's very important to practice the problem first mindset as opposed to solution first. I think all of us know this, but sometimes as PMs, we do tend to forget that. So it's very important for us to actively practice that. The second thing is keeping the problem very human-centered. At the end of the day, yes, technology is important, operations is important, but you don't want to constrain yourself as you're defining the problem. It has to be very customer-focused. And the third one is, as you're thinking about the problem definition, it shouldn't be too broad or too narrow. It shouldn't be so broad that it just becomes very hard to manage. It shouldn't be so narrow that there is no room for creativity anymore. So you want to keep that balance as you're thinking about defining the problem, because your solution is as good as how you define your problem. And lastly, prioritize, right? And at the end of the day, it's very important to leverage data. In this case, I used a lot of qualitative data and user research studies, but there are other examples where there's a lot of quantitative data available, especially if you have done tests before, A/B tests before. There's a lot of quantitative data that you can leverage to define the importance of the problem. So with that, I just want to thank you, everyone. And I look forward to the panel. I think one of the challenges we always have, and this is very specific to, I think, online grocery, is because it's so omni-channel focused, anytime we make any changes to a digital side, we have to be very closely working on the store ops side to make sure that the processes that are applied there are done consistently. So from a scale and like rollout standpoint, like that's definitely one of the challenges, right? It's very easy to put it in one store and see what happens, but to consistently do that across like multiple stores, that is definitely from an operationally, like there is a lot of balance that needs to happen. Unlike other products I worked in the past where, hey, it's a website and an app, I'll do changes, right? I can't just do changes here. I always have to make sure that my other customer, who's like the personal shopper, is actually able to like keep up with what I do here, right? It's a customer promise that we are making, so we better keep that. No, it's a combination. There is a merchandising team for the digital side who decides what it should be. I mean, the ideal world is everything that is in store, you want it to be available to purchase online, but think about things like bicycles, right? So we do offer pickup in the store for any item and delivery. So if you're thinking about delivery, at this point we work with some external delivery partners. So if a customer orders a bicycle, like I don't know if that delivery partner could deliver. So things like two-man carry items or ones that have very high fraud risks, those are some of like the constrained items, obviously. But the ideal state is anything in store should be available online. We don't. That's what I was telling earlier, right? So in essence, here the store is the fulfillment center, right? So for the online world at least, so it's shared inventory. So definitely inventory yeah, and we have ways to obviously. I mean, if you're thinking about predictive inventory, like that's one of the trends, right? If you're thinking about AI, then there are ways in which you can predict inventory from both channels, and you can make sure that that's getting stocked. So there's definitely more challenges on the operational side and inventory management, as you pointed out. Yeah.
Price per bag.
Yeah.
In the pack itself.
Yeah, we see. I was telling earlier, right? So we see. The question is like, do you see this price challenges like by weight versus by unit in other categories as well? And the answer to that is yes. I was telling earlier that in produce we see a lot of this because you have one bag of tomatoes that you charge for, or you could charge per tomato, or you could charge per pound. So the different like options there. We see more on the produce side. Yeah, we do display that on our site. Like we do show price per unit versus price. We show both. Yeah. So yeah, it does matter for some of the customers. For things like meat, right? Because there is such a huge variance in weight and the price per unit is high. If you think of turkeys, the price per unit, I learned this a few months ago, the price per unit for turkey is very, very high as compared to like a cabbage for sure, right? So yes, our customers are definitely very price sensitive. So they tend to notice on products that have higher price. Yeah, we do. Yeah, I didn't get into that as much, but as we were looking at the target customer, like the grocery shopper, there's literally like many more segments we look at. I didn't get to that detail, but yes, there are segments that we look at. We have our own internal definition of like what a target segment is, etc. Yeah. So question is, how long does an experiment last? Yeah, if it's a qualitative study like this, then it really takes like a few weeks, right? Few days or like sometimes weeks. It depends on the size of the study. But I remember we did multiple studies for this one, but one study like literally took us like a week to get users, compile the results, like define what we want to ask, get users, compile the results in like a week. Of course, quantitative ones like A/B testing and stuff, that really depends on like when we hit statistical significance. But these ones are anywhere between few days and like few weeks. Yeah, we didn't ask those hypotheses, right? So it was not a survey. It was actually, we put prototypes in front of users and just asked them to do what they would do normally when they purchase, and just explain what they would do vocally. We did not tell them anything about any of these hypotheses. This is all what we had in our back pocket, right? Yeah, I mean, that's usually how you would do like a user research study where there are obviously different techniques to it. So this one was more doing some prototypes, showing them few options and said, what do you think? How would you go about doing it? And some of them were clickable prototypes as well, so we could literally see what they would do. A lot of times, the customers don't do what they say, right? So you do want to make sure they're actually you're seeing them live. We are recording them live, obviously, but they're doing what they would do, right? They would say, hey, would you buy? They saw the price and they were like, are you going to buy this? And they would vocally say, oh, usually in the store this would be lower, so I don't know if I would want this. They would vocally talk through it. And so that's how we gained the insights. I mean, it's not, we definitely didn't talk about any of the hypotheses. Those were inferences after the studies.
All right,
Cool.
great.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's thank you very much. That's good. Awesome questions. So with that, let me invite Dalen and Nicholas up. And so just to give you a little bit of background on Nicholas. So Nicholas Cabrera brings more than 17 years of innovation and technology leadership in retail marketplaces across Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and the US. He's now the Senior VP of Product at One Market, which is just right here, and associated with Bespoke and Westfield Labs, or?
Yes.
Yes, okay, all right. And the next-gen commerce platform developing unique digital and physical commerce solutions. He was named the 2011 Ad News Top 40 Under 40 Business Executive of the Year in Asia Pacific. And so now he's working with, so just before we jump into the panel questions, do you want to give us a quick background on what you're doing, what One Market is doing, so those that aren't familiar with it can get a better sense?
Yeah, hi everyone. It's interesting because I'm pretty much sitting in the middle of a platform play for retailers and working very closely with a lot of retailers, Walmart being one of our customers on one of our products. So what we do at One Market, which is located just upstairs here, is really creating a retailer network based on physical retail and also online retailers, and trying to create a more seamless experience for a shopper every time they engage with all those brands that we see in this mall, for example. So we have customers like Nordstrom, like Macy's, Target, Walmart, Marks and Spencer's in the UK. And the idea is that instead of having to authenticate yourself every time you engage with those brands, and creating a new account, having a new app, either you shop with them online or in store, it's creating a more seamless experience. You have one profile across the network, and we can really serve you in a more personalized way across all of those brands. And I manage the product team on that, and it's definitely a platform play using GraphQL, on our platform, and trying to create solutions that don't compete with what smart retailers will actually do, but try to bring some more intelligence at the network level.
Great, yeah. And so we've had a conversation in the past, and you were telling me about all the amazing technology that goes into a build out like this in a mall like this, where they have to think ahead because you're building a mall. It's going to be around for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So you have to put the infrastructure and technology in place, even if you don't know how you're going to use it yet. So it's pretty fascinating. And I think you mentioned that it's not just malls. It's things like airline terminals and other places where it bridges the gap between online and offline, where people are interacting with the retail store, but then can go and do online purchases.
Yeah, it's really about this, this idea that the customer is the channel. So we're not about online or we're not about offline. Is really bringing, bridging the two in a more kind of seamless way, and creating value largely to allow physical retail to recognize the value of a physical store in different ways, more than just the rents and the number of transactions that will happen in that store. How can we allow retailer to understand what's happened with that customer even before they come to the store? And yes, they might visit the store, look at a few different products, but then maybe end up buying into the store next door, or online, or on mobile, or on some Shopify tool. So how can we allow retailer to understand the true value of a physical location in retail, airports, shopping centers, a standalone store, and then allowing them at the network level again, instead of just that silo view of a retailer, to recognize the true value of that online retail or physical retail.
Great, Great. Okay, so with this series of questions I want to go through, it's basically looking at three different themes that we'll run through. So first being customer and data, the second being technologies that are transforming retail, and then the third is focused on customer experience. So before we jump really into those three categories of questions, I just want to start out with a question for any or all of you on what are your biggest takeaways on retail technology, advancements in retail technology before this year, like in the last year or two, in 2018, 2017, 2018, like what have been the biggest trends, the biggest things that have been happening up until now?
I think there have been many trends, right? I mean, there are many interesting ones to call out. There's IoT, there's voice, especially discovery through voice. But to me, the one that sticks out the most is personalization. Personalization as a concept has existed for many years. It's not a new thing. However, with AI being more commercialized, we truly now see personalization actually being in action. So to me, that's one thing that I'm seeing across the board when it comes to a customer funnel, right? It starts all the way from the user acquisition when you're thinking about the ads that you see on the different social channels and search channels, all the way till the site experience where you're seeing customers who bought this also bought. So there are all these different modules that you see on shopping sites. And even like in store, right? Like there's so much personalization that is being put into play that to me is like one of the was the top trend for last year.
Mine's pretty simple. Again, with my personal biases at Shopify, I think it's direct to consumer. So the example I'll use, we all know Kylie Jenner is now the youngest billionaire ever. And she did that through Shopify, her lip kits and all of the other things my daughters are all into. But if you go back before there was Shopify, the example I really like is Air Jordans, right? So everyone knows who Michael Jordan is, basketball, Chicago Bulls. Arguably one of the greatest basketball players that has ever lived. He did a licensing deal with Nike, right? But in a direct-to-consumer world, he would be the brand, he would be the billionaire, Nike would be the fulfillment, right? Rather than him just getting a licensing fee. And I think that is one of the most powerful trends today.
And I think we're talking to a lot of retailers, and there's all those new technologies that a lot of people, are in retail trying to adopt and doing some case studies on. But we still feel that at a very basic level is trying to understand who's coming to the stores, the retailer stores. It's still amazing that in 2009, there's a lot of big, sophisticated retailers that still don't know who's coming to their stores. Online, it's pretty well developed now on how to identify a customer online. A lot of retailers doing that. Shopify really helped a lot of people doing that to actually identify who's coming to a Nordstrom stores next door. It's still really hard. And unifying that to a online ID as well. So at a very basic level, how can we help retailers doing data capture online, doing data capture in store, and unifying the two? So we have that unified shopper profile that then can feed into a personalized experience. Without that, it will still feel very fragmented for all of us as a shoppers.
Great. So personalization, the ability for brands to go direct to consumer, which didn't exist when Michael Jordan was a big deal. Yeah, but and identification of people and being able to, I guess, achieve things like personalization by being able to identify them and then be able to create a personalized experience for them. So that interestingly leads into the topic that we wanted to jump into, which is around customers and data. So we have a tremendous amount of data now. I mean, Aditi was talking about how they can run experiments. You guys at your disposal have a tremendous amount of data. Being direct to consumer, there's a lot of customers, a lot of interactions, and we collect a lot of this data. And it's a blessing and curse. We actually have a upcoming talk in our engineering leadership speaker series with Neha Jain from LinkedIn, and she's going to basically talk about data as a blessing and a curse. So it should be good. But so brands and retailers can collect this customer data from a wide variety of sources and use a lot of technologies to, it's ever increasing complexity to try to understand, their users. So how are retailers integrating this customer data to understand shopper behavior more holistically and create meaningful relationships with their customers?
I think Nicholas hit the nail on the head with the last comment. I completely agree. I think, especially in the omni-channel world, being able to take the online data and stitch that with the in-store data and creating that one view of the customer for all of the different use cases that I was mentioning earlier, right? Whether it's user acquisition or retargeting, whether it's site personalization, at every step of the funnel, having that sort of a view is super critical. And I don't think we're fully there yet. And especially because there have been years and years of in-store data, leveraging that to better do things online, I think is not leveraged enough.
And I think there's also, within the shopping center here that has a lot of sensors. I'm sure a lot of our ideas, digital footprint is getting tracked within Bespoke, within the shopping centers. Maybe one market has something to do with it. But it's really to understand, yes, we know that a lot of in-store purchases have been influenced by us researching online before coming in. And there's a lot of data capture happening around before you come to a store. How can I know and how a retailer can be informed that you as an individual, based on what you've done online, now I can actually capture that you're here or you're about to come to the store. And how the retailer can actually get the product ready, the experience ready, the personal stylist ready, based on understanding who's about to enter the stores and personalize that experience. So I think there's a lot of, merging, understanding what people do online, and then how can we have a way, not in a creepy way, but in a very open way, understand when you're actually about to arrive, so we can actually give you that exchange of value, which is personalize the experience when you're in store. So coming from the usual indoor location tracking solutions, but really not in a silo way, but linking that to what you've done previously online, and then what the experience we're going to actually provide you in store.
I believe that Shopify's main tenet is about who is the ultimate owner of your customer data. So that's the comment I made earlier about in marketplaces, the trade-off that you make, and sometimes it's worth it to get to market faster, is that you get to focus on supply, but in effect, you're renting your customers. You don't own the data of your own customers when you use that model. And the Shopify model, when it's direct consumer, we take it very seriously. Not only do you have complete access to your customer data, but it's done in a non-fragmented way, as you were using that. It's only useful when you can actually do things with it in a marketing function. And if it's fragmented, it becomes less useful. So ultimately, our posture is that customers should always have access to the data and not have to rent their customer base from other companies.
Okay, great. So in terms of the actual product development process, like what are things that companies are now, retail companies are building into their products to be able to enable them to capture some of that data? So the ability to do social listening or collect feedback from customers. What are some of those actual product development technologies or things that are going in right now?
Yeah, I think specifically, more data is better, I guess. Not always. But I think from a social listening standpoint, there is it's yet another channel for us, right? So if you earlier it was just point of sale data, but now it's social channels coming into play. A lot of the feedback is real time. It's not ones that we truly sought after. Customers give it to us whether we ask or not. So in terms of how that can be leveraged, going back to some of the things I was telling earlier, it can not only be leveraged to understand the pain points and problems customers have. Like airlines have a very common theme where customers always complain on social media websites, right? So it's definitely a useful channel to understand problems, but it's also a great channel to think about what's the trends in the market, what customers care about. So it does help in like solutioning as well, if you pay very close attention to what customers are saying. So from that standpoint, you could take that to the next level and even co-create with customers. So to me, that's a very interesting angle as opposed to just looking at it as a channel where customers just keep whining about pain points.
I guess from a product management standpoint, I would, as my story that I told earlier probably told and reinforced over and over again, is API first, right? So when you're a product manager, if you are planning on building in a platform way, you need to think about what you're building so that you can eventually externalize what you choose to. It's not a mandate that you need to externalize your API, but if you don't build it in a services way, you never have the optionality to do it. And if you think about yourself as an operating system where you're inviting in an ecosystem to build that final 20%, the way you have to think in a services first way. And I think companies that don't do that aren't going to be around as of 2 weeks ago. Like products, I should say, not companies. Products that don't do that won't be around.
And I think just to build on that platform thinking, it's always amazed me that in the US, only 7% of retailers have an integrated checkout process consistent from online to in-store. And they have the ability to merge the data between online transactions that happen on their e-commerce website or link that to a point of sale system that they may have in some of their stores. If you don't have a way to get those two checkout systems to talk to each other, then all the experiences we're going to have is going to be very fragmented. And in return, the retailers will have very fragmented view of us as shoppers. So won't be able to really provide that personalized experience. So on the platform side, how from an identity point of view, every time a retailer, we engage with the retailers on their online website, on their app, in-store, how can they make sure that all those user interactions are linking to like one user identity? How all of my transactions are kept and stitched together. So we have actually a full view of that customer. So again, tapping into that platform play is not like a point solution here that's going to solve that item. And then a different point solution here that's going to fix another part of the shopper journey. How can we make sure we have a platform view on things across payment, across identity, across the services that the retailer provide?
Wonderful. So switching to the customer side for a second. So we talked about how as a company, what are some of the things that you're putting in place? What are some of the trends you're seeing in customer behavior? And we've touched on this in the talks as well, but what trends are you seeing or what do you anticipate seeing in terms of how customers discover, shop, buy, their consumer behaviors?
So I think one of the biggest trends I anticipate to come up is this idea where no longer discovery and purchase has to happen in two different places. And the testament to that is the announcement that came last week where Instagram introduced checkout. So Instagram has always been a platform for discovery, right? Now with checkout of being a feature, you're seeing social media channels now introducing commerce, right? So content and commerce are now going together. On the other hand, Amazon is an e-commerce site, which has been heavily investing in their ad tech platform because they also want to play in not just conversion, but also in the discovery. So that's a very interesting trend for me. And now yesterday I heard Walmart CTO Jeremy King left us and joined Pinterest. So I was like, wow, that's definitely I definitely see where this is going, right? So that's, to me, it's no longer about going to customers having to go to different places for discovery versus purchase. It's where customers are. That's where you see companies providing all of this different functionality in one place.
I think maybe another trend as well is around this idea about the customer is the channel. Too often still we're thinking about an online shopper journey or a physical shopper journey, but how can we make sure that we are contextual wherever the customer wants to discover, maybe make some purchase, and trying to interact wherever they are. And more, they're not necessarily on the retailer app or on the retailer website. They might be on, Instagram. They might be on Facebook. They might be on, other platforms or other marketplaces. That's where they want to actually discover information about product. They want to actually maybe purchase. So let's make sure we're actually there. And yes, the store will still have a role to play to inform that purchase along the way. The online store will inform that as well, but let's make sure that we allow the customer to interact with those brands the way they want to. It's not easy, but definitely a trend we see from a shopper point of view.
One of the biggest trends that we're seeing is more of a global trend outside of North America, and it's in chat. So a lot of it's called conversational commerce, and it's really big in China right now. The majority of people who are on their devices are not buying through websites. They're actually buying through WeChat. In China. So I think North America is very behind, as usual, from our compatriots over there in technology. So we have a lot to learn about how conversational commerce actually happens in a real-time chat interface. And Shopify, of course, is excited to see that happen because that's back in putting the commerce back in the hands of the many model that we believe in and we think is taking over the world.
Right. So yeah, the good insights. So just to kind of sum it up, so a lot of social buying, people buying where they're browsing. So the way that they're interacting with the brands, maybe 20 years ago you would interact with the brand by going to the store. Now you're interacting with the brand on social, so it makes sense to basically be able to buy on social. So that's a big trend. And then that conversational commerce is also a very interesting trend that we're seeing in Asia. And I think there was actually a book that was published recently by Drift, maybe, called Conversational Marketing. Yeah. So they just released a book on that whole topic, and they're doing some category creation around that, I think. So okay, so let's jump into technologies that are transforming retail. So AI is obviously the big thing that everyone's talking about. So AI has had a lot of impact already on things like facial recognition, on helping with personalization, which we've already talked about ever increasingly. What are some of the ways that what are the ways and what is significant about AI being incorporated in product development process and in the product development process in retail?
Shopify has recently had a big AR/VR push, and so the couple, it's Chip Gaines, I forget what his wife's name is, but they actually have a Shopify store where they actually are showing 3D models of what you can actually purchase. And so we're seeing a lot of AR/VR modeling that is going to be happening in commerce, and it's being used today in really innovative, cool ways, coming from individual retailers like HGTV online celebrities. They're deciding that they want to sell things in the best.
Yeah, from what we saw on our network, the way we have an interesting use case of an AI is around returns. And how can we make returns for retailers at the network level, so across retailers, a lot more efficient? As we know, returns is a big market, cost retailers a lot to manage and handle and operate returns. And we're actually leveraging, we have a product called Shopper Predict, which is based on your transaction behavior, both online and in store. We can actually create a return profile leveraging AI on, either you're gonna be a return addict because you keep actually buying three, of the same item in different sizes, or because you're buying the same item from 3 different brands, again, different sizes or different colors. So we're actually creating different profile of your return behavior. Based on that, we can actually inform the retailers on prevent the return to happen in the first place. And maybe for that type of profile, because again, on your profile based on AI inform data, we can actually say, okay, that for you is going to be actually paid to actually return this item. For this one, because you're actually a high-value customer and your return profile tell us that you're not actually every time trying to skew the system, then the return might be free. So we actually have a very specific use case leveraging AI on optimizing return for retailers.
Yeah, I think on the consumer tech side, there's obviously a lot of different areas, as you mentioned, around like site personalization, things where you could easily leverage AI. But to me, the most exciting part is how AI is now getting leveraged more on these, what I call as dry areas, but really hard problems that need to be solved in the retail space. It's things like pricing, inventory. If you're thinking about pricing, how can we show dynamic pricing to the user? If you're thinking about inventory, how do you think about demand forecasting? Fraud is a very big problem, so just like returns. So how do you think about building fraud models using AI? So some of those core back-end systems that truly power like an e-commerce platform or even like an offline platform, introducing AI there and to solve those hard problems, to me, is very exciting.
Really good. Yeah, I actually for a while worked in airline pricing and price optimization, and it's really fascinating because partly airlines wouldn't even survive without being able to do dynamic pricing, but also they've figured out over the years how to do pricing and build in other forms of revenue, ancillary revenue through other sources like selling meals before you get on a flight, and sometimes they can actually make more of a margin off of people when they buy stuff on the plane and they do an upgrade or whatever than the actual price of the ticket. So I imagine through pricing, personalization, using AI to really optimize that, you can get to a point where you can really improve margins on the top line. So blockchain, cryptocurrencies, blockchain, it seems to kind of come and go with the price of Bitcoin. When it's high, everyone wants to talk about it. When it's low, no one wants to talk about it. So with that, what are your thoughts on blockchain? Like what's going on there with blockchain, with cryptocurrencies? How is that impacting retail? Who's using it? Is it real? Is it something that's happening?
Yeah, I think it's definitely in the nascent stage as opposed to some of the other areas such as AI. It's not as commercialized as some of those other areas like AR, VR, or AI. But there are definitely a lot of use cases in retail and even outside of retail where I think blockchain can be used, right? Like it could be around marketing and how we do media buying. It could be in the area of supply chain management. That there's a very big part blockchain can play there. Very similar to real estate, right? I think that's where supply chain comes into play, and also the standard things like payments. Being able to accept those kind of payments. But to me, like the area which I find it very interesting is on the supply chain side. How do you really think about applying like blockchain and truly make that commercial product for people to go after?
Yeah, and definitely super early, but in our network where we use blockchain in an interesting way is on our network we have some retailers and we have some retail venues like shopping centers or airports, and often those two don't really talk to each other. Because the venues will charge rents to the store, and the store don't really want to share too much with the person charging them a lease. So we have some interesting use case where leveraging the blockchain, where we actually connect from the supply chain providers to the store to the venue that can help provide storage, in this concept of leveraging the physical location as a fulfillment store, all the way to the store itself that will have some of the product on shelf. We actually have a pilot running right now in LA between Westfield Century City, LAX, and some of the stores there. That how can we start sharing, instead of all of us investing in very similar technology, how can we mutualize the technology in the same chain between stores, between suppliers, and between venues? Too early to really talk about the results of it, but it's interesting that it seems to start optimizing, not all of us investing in the same way to manage our digital assets between product inventory, logistics, and supply. But very early, I think, in the retail space.
Great. Okay, so switching over to customer experience. So forward-thinking retailers are aligning both human and digital resources to make physical shopping experiences more personalized. So we've talked a lot about personalization, more interesting, more fun. So what are companies? How are companies approaching delighting customers in store and online? And I know we've touched on some of this, but what are some of the key things that people are doing to really delight customers through the shopping experience?
Yeah, I think talking about store, right? I think one of the, of course, technology is valuable and adopting that in stores is valuable with things like, I recently saw a virtual try-on experience for cosmetics and, apparel, right? I think those are really exciting stuff. But to me, one of the other areas where I see from a customer experience standpoint, there is a lot of value is really the employees, really the human beings who are at the store. So to me, leveraging them to provide that human experience, to me, is something where a lot more can be done, right? And I think there are companies which are focusing on that. They're not just introducing technology, but they're also leveraging their employees. For example, like I know in the Milpitas store, we have, that's where, I order grocery and I go to pick up. I know that Teresa is going to do an amazing job with my grocery. So she always loads my cart. So that's really the one-on-one relationship I have with the store pickers. To me, that's a distinct advantage, especially on the store side, that you could have.
Yeah, I think on a similar trend, one example, we're working with this company called Hero. I'm not sure if you heard about it. They're based in London, but they start working with quite a few retailers here. And on a similar trend, they're actually leveraging their heroes, being the store staff, to help when they're actually not serving customers in store. There is a very seamless way to all the retailers that they're working on. I'm on, let's say, a Nordstrom.com website. I'm looking at some product. I can actually tap into my local Nordstrom staff to either show me the product in different ways than just this flat photo that we'll have on the e-commerce site, making sure that that person will actually reserve the item for me. I start building some personal relationship with the person in store when I'm actually online, reviewing what I'm gonna go and try in store. So this whole kind of connecting and leveraging the in-store staff when I'm actually engaging online and researching online, all the way to reserve the item, make it ready for me when I arrive. That whole seamless experience between online to in-store, it's definitely a big new experience that I think a lot of retailers are trying into.
Yeah, I'm plus oneing basically your comment, but at Shopify, because we are able to do multi-channel really well, we have offline point of sale that actually integrates with the data to your online store too. So when you have that whole package, you can service customers regardless of where they want to shop. If it's on one of these, whether it's on store, or some variation of I want to order it, like you're saying, and then pick it up in store. Non-fragmented data is what makes all that possible. So that, I think, delights customers when you actually know who they are, regardless if they're interacting with you online or offline.
Yeah, the other trend on the digital side I would like to add is that you know there are two types of shopping intent, right? As a customer, I know what I want to buy. So if I already know what I want to buy and I come to a site, you want them to do that fast. You want to make that as fast as possible. The reason you want to make that as fast as possible is because you can shift their attention to spend more time discovering other stuff. So when you're thinking about optimizing time for the customer, it's about reducing time for things they know already they want to buy. So making that experience quick. Like in a grocery world, if every week if I buy tomatoes and steak, like add them to like build a predictive basket where we can put them for them right away, and allow them to actually explore other products that they're likely to that are likely to increase the overall basket size. So I see that trend like across not just grocery, but also on all the other e-commerce channels as well.
Yeah. Wonderful. So yeah, so enabling employees, so giving the employees superpowers to do their job better, to create a better experience is an amazing insight that I never would have thought of, because the focus on the question really was thinking about directly providing value to the consumers. So that's a really good insight. And then of course, creating the seamless online to in-store experience and multi-channel approach is good. Performance in terms of customer experience is definitely very important. It's also an important factor from the perspective of the actual performance of the application. I was watching the Captain Marvel movie, and they showed, like, it was based in the 80s, and they show like a computer loading a screen, and it takes like 10 minutes, and they're all sitting around waiting for it. And it's just crazy to think about how technology has advanced and made things so fast, and we're also impatient and want everything immediately. So just delivering that is both a technical challenge and a product management challenge. So wonderful. So I guess we'll just wrap up with one last question. So we started by asking, what are some of the things that have happened until now? And of course, we've talked a lot about the technologies that are in place and some of the stuff, but just focusing a little bit on what's coming up. Like, what are some of the trends that you think now in 2019, or maybe over the next 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years? Like, what are some of the most exciting trends that are coming up now that we've kind of yet to see in terms of all of the stuff we've talked about: technology, customer experience, everything?
I think for me, I touched upon one of this earlier, which was blurring the line between content and conversion. I think that's a big trend that I'm seeing. The other one would be that, physical stores aren't going away. So to me, it's not, from a customer point of view, it's not really one over the other. It's really about providing both these options to the customers, if available, and letting the user self-select. So to me, a lot of companies who have physical stores and have online presence, they definitely have a strategic advantage, because now they are able to leverage both to allow customers to self-select. And you see that trend already with a lot of competitors of ours wanting to set up more physical locations.
I think that both the online and offline retail story for both customers here in North America as well as globally is a big trend for us as we scale to. We just translated our partner dashboard to 15 different languages this year. So making sure that we are speaking not only in a translated way, but in a localized way, so that we're sensitive to local markets. If a German buyer has a particular interest, just translating them to German doesn't get the job done. And then lastly, I would just leave you, I already mentioned China, but I think watching like the generation coming up, we just had the millennial generation just turned into adults. So the very youngest millennial just turned 18. We are now looking at teenagers and how they're interacting with commerce. The digital natives, Gen Z, however you want to refer to them, I think their identity is still coming of age, but they grew up with these things. I know, I'm raising two of them. And it's amazing to see the expectations they have of commerce behavior. And I think getting them part of focus groups is really kind of the next frontier in terms of we've seen the millennials and that generation. They're coming. I'm sure a lot of you are in that cohort right now. But the digital natives and how they grew up with devices and expecting certain behavior, I think, is something to watch for retail as well.
And I think there's a trend also around how do you attribute value of your either physical location as a retailer or online location in this new millennial, world. Some people, yes, will want to buy, and that might still be wherever we allow that purchase to happen. That's one way to attribute value to what the retailer are creating and the user interaction with those brands. But some people will want to rent the item. I've got a dress a party to go to tonight. I might just want to rent that dress, but I don't want to own the same way that maybe some of us, at least me, with my old age, wanted to actually own things. We all kind of rent bike. We all rent cars. We might not want to own cars anymore. So what is in that new world of renting versus owning, sharing? How do we see the value and allow retailers to still recognize value for the in-store or online stores they might create? I think we need to invent. I don't think any of us have the solutions yet, but we need to invent that attribution model of the new shopping behaviors.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. So we'll, round of applause. So we can open up to, I guess, a few questions, and I'll hand the mic over and then ask a question of the panel, and then we'll try to wrap up in, maybe we'll go through questions for about 5 to 8 minutes or so, and then we'll wrap up. So anybody have a question?
I had a stupid question. I didn't understand the concept of headless. Headless commerce? First time for me to hear that one. Can you come back on that?
Yes, clearly I did not do a good job of explaining the concept. Are you familiar with headless CMS? That's usually the easiest way that I talk about it. So companies like Contentful and so I use Contentful on one side and Drupal and WordPress on the other. So if you're used to a WYSIWYG interface on your store as a merchant, you can go in and enter and make things bold and put pictures here. It's all what you see is what you get like on an online store editor. A headless commerce way of looking at it actually decouples the technology layer. So there's a front end presentation layer and a back end performance layer, for lack of a better word. And that exists not only in CMS and websites, but also in online stores. So that's where the concept, it's basically borrowing the term headless CMS and applying it towards headless commerce, where online stores. I hope that answered your question this time. Okay, great.
I know in the browser, or in the testing world, a headless browser is a web browser that doesn't have a user interface, so they use it for test automation. So if that helps. Questions? Anybody else? No? Yeah, one more. All right.
Hi. Actually, I feel like an underdog here because everyone is a product manager. I'm just a student in business analytics, but I come from a marketing background of 6 years. And listening to all of you guys, especially Aditi, where she was talking about Walmart and how she went through research process to figure out the problem solving. So I feel there's a lot of overlap between the marketing, because it's a digital product, the marketing and product solving. So I want to understand, do you guys actually connect with the teams, internal teams, rather than conducting their own research? Because even they do that, because it's all about connecting with your consumers and solving their problems. And marketing, especially digital marketing, not just constrained to kind of communication that you serve them, but actually the kind of product you have, because that's what you're selling. So what's the overlap, and how do you kind of like for a second in my mind I thought that, is there a need of a product manager?
So,
I'm sorry.
yeah, so I am a product marketer. So in most organizations, you have PMs, product managers, and you have PMMs, which are product marketing managers. And I consider my relationship with my PM like I'm locked at the hip with her, right? So we go through, and that's because she involves me early. So I can do studies like this. So like we want to inform with data what the approach is that we're going to take. So marketing increasingly more and more is incredibly important for informing the product direction. And if done right, it's extremely powerful.
Yeah, I've actually done marketing before I started doing product management, so I can completely empathize with that question. So I think at the end of the day, it's about having a strong understanding of customer and building an experience that delights the customer, right? So in terms of how we are internally organized, yes, there is bound to be overlap, not just between marketing and product, but also with other functions such as design. Because if you really think about who we are going after or defining customer segments. Some of those areas around understanding users, there is a very close partnership with design as well, not just marketing. So there is a lot of like sharing and learning that happens. There are definitely parts that overlap where we all need to have a very common understanding of who we are really going after. But in terms of how we leverage, how the areas that each of the functions focus on could be a little bit different. But from a product management standpoint, like every day you collaborate with every different function, as Dylan already said, right? So there is definitely overlap in understanding, but in terms of what you do on a day-to-day basis, there could be some overlap, but there are certain things that only a product manager does versus what a product marketer does.
Great. One more.
Hi, I'm also a product manager, and I've been in platform products for the last 8 years. I think one tricky area, as you touch everyone from the end consumer to larger merchants using your sites, to really large corporations up market, is measuring success, and where what metrics matter and for what time frame. And so my question is for each of your industries, how do you measure success? Is it customer retention? Is it sales? And what kind of time frame do you base these metrics off of? Is it off of one release or is it longer term?
Very good question. I think the short answer is I think it depends. But when we look at metrics, there are a couple of lenses we look at, right? One is the product metrics, and there are business metrics, and then sometimes there is also like operational metrics, right? So those are some of the different buckets we look at. So from a product metric standpoint, each of these areas, there is short-term, medium-term, and long-term view of. So depending on which one you care about, typically the short-term metrics are different from your long-term metrics. So for example, you talked about retention rate or even like customer lifetime value. So those are long-term metrics, right? It's not something you can measure right away as you put an A/B test out there. Like you don't know how this is going to affect the customer lifetime value unless you have some sort of a fancy predictive model that predicts the lifetime value. So there is always other proxies you have to use from a short-term standpoint to see how you're measuring success. So when we think about metrics, like those are sort of the different areas we look at, like whether it's product versus business versus operational. Business and operational are usually like risk mitigation metrics, right? For example, you introduce a new feature on the site, and maybe the goal of that was, the success metric was to increase the add to cart rate on the site. You want more people to add items to the cart. But from a risk mitigation perspective, if your returns go up, down funnel, or if your GMV goes down, then the test is not successful. So that's how we look at like metrics. And metrics are usually tied to initiatives. And of course, there's the overall like business product health metrics as well, right? So that we regularly like review and manage as like a more as a P&L management. But every initiative has to have like a set of success metrics we associate to and we measure. Does it help?
Yeah, definitely online. I think we all experience the same challenge. The one thing I would add is we do a lot of MVP tests, to be able to learn fast, fail fast, hopefully succeed fast as well. And we often put ourselves a 60-day, within my team time frame on how to, because we could go and analyze for the next 6 months on a specific feature we just released, and so we really try to be very disciplined on a 60-day view on no more than 3 metrics that we look at, some operational, some more revenue-based, some product-based, but the time frame I think is quite important as well, because we can all die out of too many analyses and and metrics.
Great. Good. All right. Any last questions? Going once, going twice. All right. With that, thank you to our wonderful panel, and thank you guys for coming out tonight.